Joy, what? Oh, you're ready.
I'm prepared. I'm launching now.
I was just going to say, Joy, welcome everybody.
Welcome everybody.
And she was on it.
I'm
She
scared.
was well prepared for it after last week and every week before that. So welcome back, everybody. We are finishing out the book of Ruth today.
Yep.
And we're glad that you have come and hung in to the very end to finish out the story with us. Hey, I normally do this at the end, but I'm going to do it now as a reminder. Just as you're sitting there, if you're watching on YouTube, to be sure that you hit the subscribe button, to share the video. If you're listening on a platform where you can leave a rating, that scares the death out of Joy because she always thinks
to be rated.
She always thinks you're going to leave a bad rating, and I'm like, if you're listening to us this far in, you probably like us.
I shouldn't be scared then.
No.
Okay.
But here's the reason for that is there's all these algorithms, Joy. Algorithms is what makes people see things like podcasts pop up in their timelines and in the top of their Spotify. Like, hey, you should listen to this. We think you'd enjoy this. And so the more that you share it, the more that you listen or watch, the more that you subscribe and follow, the more people that do that, the more Lunch with PB&J gets shared with the whole world.
Gotcha.
Which is what Joy's dream is to be shared with the whole world.
Sure.
Her podcast. So, because she likes to share. She's a good sharer. So anyway, do that. We'd appreciate it greatly. Okay? And so, hey, so will the people you share it with. They'll appreciate it as well.
Yes.
All right. Chapter 4 follows chapter 3. If you weren't here for chapter 3, you're listening to the wrong podcast. Go back and listen to chapter 3 and then come back and join us for chapter 4. But as a refresher, as a reminder, chapter 3 ends. Ruth has asked Boaz to bring her under his wings of protection. And that's the same language that he used in his blessing over her, and the same language that the prophets used for God in Israel, that they would be under the blessing of the wings of God, under the wings of God.
This was a marriage proposal.
And so it really was framed in the context of marriage. And chapter 3 ends with Boaz telling Ruth that there is a relative that is closer to her, or closer to Naomi, really Naomi's husband.
Right.
Let's get the timeline. Let's get it right. And that closer relative has the right to marry Ruth and to redeem the family, to be the family redeemer, not necessarily Boaz. So he says, I'm going to take care of this. Leave it in my hands. I got you, Ruth. And so that's where we leave the story.
We were kind of left waiting. Hey, wait, be patient. Boaz is going to handle business.
He's going to handle business. All right. So that's where we are. I'm going to read a big chunk of this.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with you.
Okay. So I'm going to read a big chunk, and we're going to start at verse 1. It says, Boaz went to the town gate, which is where that's where business was conducted, was at the town gate. And he took a seat there. Just then the family redeemer he had mentioned came by, so Boaz called out to him, come over here and sit down, friend. I want to talk to you. So they sat down together. Then Boaz called 10 leaders from the town and asked them to sit as witnesses to this conversation that he was going to have. So I'm just going to drop a couple little notes as we go. So the idea of calling the witnesses is this was going to be something that needed to be decided on. Right. The elders of the community kind of needed to approve what was going to happen here. And so the law actually didn't, and you're going to see this theme as we go through it, the law actually didn't require 10 witnesses. It only required, I think, 2 or 3.
2 or 3.
It only required 2 or 3 witnesses. So Boaz, again, is going above and beyond what is required. Which
kind
is
of like he's going to, I
Boaz.
just wrote it down like he's going to court.
Yeah. So he asked them to sit as witnesses, and the town, witnesses. And Boaz said to the family redeemer, you know Naomi, who came back from Moab. She's selling the land that belonged to our relatives, Elimelech. I thought I should speak to you about it so that you can redeem it if you wish. If you want the land, then buy it here in the presence of these witnesses. But if you don't want it, let me know right away, because I am next in line to redeem it after you. The man replied, cool, I'll redeem it. Then Boaz told him, of course, hey, wait, Of course, your purchase of the land from Naomi also requires that you marry Ruth, the Moabite widow. That way she can have children who will carry on her husband's name and keep the land in the family. Well, then I can't redeem it, the family redeemer replied, because this might endanger my own estate. You redeem the land, I can't do it. Now, in those days, it was custom in Israel for anyone transferring a right of purchase to remove his sandal and hand it to the other party. This publicly validated the transaction, so the other family redeemer drew off his sandal as he said to Boaz, "You buy the land." So he lost the land and a shoe.
It is a funny visual.
It's a great.
I was going to take off my shoe.
I taught on this years ago. I taught on this in relation to another story.
Yeah.
It was just I found this fascinating because it connects throughout kind of the Old Testament Jewish history and stuff. Even in these different places where you see "take off your shoe."
Yeah.
Where God appears and said, "Take off your shoes." I think the context I used it in was in the story of Joshua, where he's about to go into Jericho and there's this big army soldier-looking angel that appears to him that night, and he tells him to take off his shoes. And the whole thing kind of refers back to this because what it really was is a transferring of the rights. You're giving up your right to something.
Yeah.
And so what that if you remember that story, the angel says, "Listen, I know whose side I'm on." Whose side are you fighting
him taking off his shoe. Now I'm
and
going to
so
go back and read that.
So he takes off his shoes and kneels in there. And so it's this thing of Joshua's giving up his right to lead the army of Israel and giving it to this guy.
Yeah.
And so this is where it comes from.
Yeah.
It comes from this Jewish tradition of taking off a shoe to transfer rights.
I found it fascinating because it's just, it all like.
It has nothing to do with the story of Ruth. It's just kind of interesting.
One commentary basically says, like, it's like you're taking off your shoe and you're handing it to that other person, and it is that giving up of your rights. But it's basically saying, "Hey, walk in my shoes." Like what should have been mine. Hey, you now walk in my shoes.
Now you walk on the land. Yeah. So here's kind of the summary of what's happened. Boaz follows through on his promise to redeem Ruth. So that was where we left off in 3. And so he goes and waits at the city gate. As I said, that's where business takes place. And then Boaz presents the case as this family redeemer comes by. He says, "Hey, listen, here's the deal. Here's where we're at. Naomi's husband, Elimelech, had a piece of land, but now Naomi, because she's in this poverty state, she is going to have to sell the land." And so he says, "You as a closest relative." So normally, this would fall under all falls under the Levitical law. All right, so under the laws that came around the time of Moses, and so that law really more dictated, like it really went to like the brother-in-law should have been the one that was the family redeemer, and then the further away it got from that family connection, like from that specific brother-in-law connection, the less responsibility there really was attached to it. All right. So we're getting further and further and further away from there really being. So it was more of like, you have a right to buy the land, but it wasn't necessarily an obligation to buy the land. So neither this man or Boaz really had an obligation to do anything here. It was just they had the right of first refusal.
Tension, tell me if I'm wrong, but wasn't there more tension if it was the brother and he didn't do it? Because like there's a story where somebody spits in somebody's face because
this is where it comes from. Okay, is if you go to Deuteronomy chapter 25, they're talking about that. If two brothers are living together on the same property and one of them dies without a son, his widow may not be married to anyone from outside the family. Instead, her husband's brother should marry her and have intercourse with her to fulfill the duties of a brother-in-law. The first son she bears to him will be considered the son of the dead brother, so that his name will not be forgotten in Israel. So that's where this all leads to. And then this is what happens if the man refuses. Verse 7 of Deuteronomy chapter 25. But if the man refuses to marry his brother's widow, she must go to the town gate, which is where Boaz is.
Right, go to court.
And say to the elders assembled there, which is what he did. He assembled them.
Yeah.
And she is to say, my husband's brother refuses to preserve his brother's name in Israel. He refuses to fulfill the duties of a brother-in-law by marrying me. The elders of the town will then summon him and talk with him. If he still refuses and says, I don't want to marry her, the widow must walk over to him in the presence of the elders, pull his sandal from his foot, and spit in his face. Then she must declare, this is what happens to a man who refuses to provide his brother with children. Even afterward, in Israel, his family will be referred to as the family of the man whose sandal was pulled off.
Wow.
So you even lose your family name. You get spit in the face, a shoe gets taken from you, and you lose the family name.
And I think like we have to put ourselves in that Jewish custom, in that day, in that age, because for us, we're like, what's the big deal? But it was very, in that time, it would have been a very like dishonoring thing. So it's her future security that he's not giving her, but it's also like, you know, it's the lineage. It was everything, right? The genealogy was everything. And so to take that away from somebody was a big deal.
And I think too, like we really see this picture of, again, so if you look at the Levitical law, which I know we've just read it in Deuteronomy, but it's a Levitical law.
You're right.
What's interesting in that, and Levitical law more so means not necessarily that it happened in the book of Leviticus, but it happened under the priests, the Levites. So, but when you look at that, it said like the woman was to go to the elders, the woman was to go to the gate, the woman was to go to the elders, the woman was to, you know, have this man summoned, and all. The woman was to go over and take the shoe and spit in his face and declare all these things. That was the woman. It was all fell to the widow. Yeah. But in this scenario, we have Boaz going, I'm going to handle this.
I'm going to do this for you. Okay.
And so even without having, even without Ruth being his wife, even without him really having any responsibility put on him, in the sense of he had no obligation. I guess go back to that. Even without having any obligation to Ruth or Naomi, Boaz takes control. And he says, I'm going to make sure that you get redeemed. I'm going to make sure that you get taken care of. I'm going to make sure all of this happens. And so I'm going to go to the city gate. I'm going to summon the elders. I'm going to negotiate all of this. He becomes the mediator.
Right.
And I think, again, we keep talking about how Boaz is this Christ-like character in the Old Testament.
Right.
And that's really what Jesus became for us, is he became our mediator between the fallen man, where we had lost our position in the family of God, and our redemption with God. He became the mediator to make all of those things happen.
And I let even the chapter 3, how it ends, where Naomi's just goes back to that character thing that Boaz had, where it's like, you know, he's going to settle this, you know, and that must have been so. And maybe the reason she's telling Ruth not to worry is because, hey, you don't have to handle this. Yeah. He's going to go handle it for you, right?
There's a kinsman redeemer that's going to handle everything for you. He's going to make sure this happens.
I think it's interesting how you see the contrast of the one guy, the first guy, and it's like he's interested at first in the investment of the land. And then when he finds out, he gets reminded about Ruth. Hey, you know, if you buy this land, it also comes with Ruth, you know, right? So when he gets reminded of that, that is what is like, no, I can't do this. And he uses the word because this might endanger my own estate. And so, you know, you just reading into the context of what that implies, it sounds like that he possibly could have already, you know, had a family, already been married. And so, because the idea that's interesting here is, when Boaz purchases this land, and then when it's an investment for him, but then when Ruth is involved, then that means he needs to provide an heir for the dead guy. Like, that's what's interesting to me, is it's, so I think the first guy had a problem because he's like, you know, he would have to, hey, I would lose this investment. Right. It would go to the dead man's son, basically, if I give her an heir. And I just think it's interesting to see the contrast of the first guy's interested when the investment benefits him. But we look at the character of Boaz, and he's interested because of Ruth and how it will benefit her. Right. Like, and the reason you just see a different character trait there. And I'm not painting the other guy as some awful person. No. But it's just like this thing of you see the difference.
Yeah. Because again, he had no obligation. Yeah. And so, which is also why I think, you know, we don't see him getting spit in the face. We don't see him losing his family name. is because I don't feel like necessarily the obligation was there for him to have to do this.
Yeah.
It was just simply that he was given a choice. Do you want to do this?
Yeah.
And once he saw what it was going to cost him,
Yes.
he said, you know what? I think I'm going to take a hard pass on this.
Yeah. Yeah. And then to see the opposite in Boaz of just, because I don't know if we've gotten there yet or not. Yeah, maybe we're not there yet, but 9 and 10 kind of show that Boaz has the intention of it's about Ruth. It's about the seed that needs to be raised
Which
up.
is what I thought was interesting when I read it, is because when Boaz comes to the man, he presents it to be more about the land.
Yeah.
Like, do you want to redeem the land? Do you want to redeem the land?
He's a little wise in that area.
He's very wise in
Skillful.
that, because it's like he's trying to present it as it's like the land, but under that law, it was not just the land, it was also the people. And so the guy was all excited about the land, he just didn't care about the people.
Yeah.
Whereas Boaz in his heart was way more concerned about the people than he was about the land.
And you see that play out. I mean, we're in the 4th chapter. You see that play out in every, all of it, where he's been very just respectfully blesses Ruth, and he sees this good. So you can see that it's about.
And so I even wrote down, why did Boaz present it this way? Was it intentional in the sense of, was he trying to gauge the man's heart? And it's this thing of, he comes to this guy and says, listen, because he says, Naomi, you know that, Ruth came back with him or came back from Moab with her, and all of these things, and now there's this piece of land that's up for sale here, and do you want to do anything with the land? Well, this guy would know that it would be recognized that not only do you take on the responsibility of the land, but also of Ruth, and to provide an heir. And so is it presented in such a way that Boaz goes, okay, if this guy truly cares for Ruth, he will say, yes, not only will I redeem the land, I'll redeem the woman as well, but he doesn't. Yeah. And so I think it shows, okay, and so was he trying to do that? I don't know. I'm reading between the lines, guys.
And this is the purpose of why you have the 10 elders that are there to watch out for all this too. Otherwise, I mean, Ruth could have been put aside, and that would have been, hey, I want the land, but I don't want Ruth.
Right.
Yeah.
So everything was done according to the book, but it was just in the way that Boaz presented it really framed out who cares for what here.
Well, and let's, I know this was like a business transaction, or that was about the property, but I think it's this thing that's true is God gives us wisdom of how to deal with other people, and in our daily things, and our all of our spiritual life should affect how we interact with people, and he gives us wisdom in these situations that it could have gone different, and it could have gone wrong, and so I think that God gave Boaz wisdom of how to deal with.
Yeah. So just to read those couple of verses you were talking about, verse 9, it says, then Boaz said to the elders and to the crowd standing around, you are witnesses that today I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Chilion, and Mahlon.
Yeah, that's the way we've been saying it.
Mahlon. I added a whole bunch of vowels there. And with the land I have acquired Ruth, the Moabite widow of Mahlon, to be my wife. This way she can have a son to carry on the family name of her dead husband and to inherit the family property here in his hometown. You are all my witnesses today. Did you have something there?
Well, and you read those couple of verses and you might not think that says too much, but I look at that and I just, again, I read that and I was like, that was the purpose all along. That was the purpose of this whole thing. I mean, it is individual, that God cares about us individually, and he cared about Ruth and Naomi and to provide for them and all those things. But the purpose of this was always about raising up a seed for the dead. And that was why this law was put in place by God. But you think about it in that parallel, because what we've been doing is we're reading this and we're just parallel that picture of Jesus and what he did for us. And it's this thing of the purpose was always to take something that was dead, hopeless, lost, and to make it right again. That is what redemption is, right? Yeah. And so I look at that, and I think that's why Boaz's heart in looking at Ruth and wanting to provide this seed for this dead man, it's that's that picture of Jesus, I guess, is we were dead in our sin, and we were dead and lost and hopeless, And the purpose is to raise up to life something that, was lost.
Yeah.
And so I see that parallel when you read that verse.
It's good. Next couple of verses says, Then the elders and all the people standing in the gate replied, We are witnesses. May the Lord make this woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, from whom all the nation of Israel descended. May you prosper in that place and be famous in Bethlehem. And may the Lord give you descendants by this young woman who will be like those of our ancestor Perez, the son of Tamar and Judah. So this is kind of interesting. So all the city goes, hey, yay, there's going to be a wedding. So everybody's excited about it. And then the elders declare kind of this blessing over Boaz and over Ruth. And drop my pen. I need a pen
He needs to hold a pen.
And so they declare this blessing. And I thought the blessing was interesting because there's a comparison and a contrast, is kind of how I see it, is a comparison and contrast. So first, there's this comparison of Ruth to Leah and Rachel. And what's interesting about that is Leah and Rachel, they are, they're known as the mothers of Israel.
Yeah,
so
that's where the 12 tribes
Where the 12 tribes of Israel come from.
Right.
And so they are the mothers of Israel.
Yeah.
And so Ruth, here we have Ruth being compared to the two mothers of Israel when Ruth was a Moabite.
Right.
She was from outside of Israel.
These are the things we have to constantly be taking ourselves back to and remembering, right?
Yeah, and so here they are. And so this blessing, I saw it this way, and by comparing her to the mothers of Israel, it was like for the first time. So Ruth had obviously been accepted by Naomi. She had obviously been accepted by Boaz.
Yeah.
But now the elders are accepting her on behalf of the nation of Israel. For the first time, you see where she is truly accepted as one of the family of God.
Yeah.
And it's this thing of, may she be like the mothers of all of Israel. May she produce a child just as they produce child. And they will be together a part of the family of God. She is truly one of them. They welcomed Ruth to further the next generation of Israel. And I just thought that was a neat comparison there.
It's a big blessing. Like we would look at that and say, oh, these are people in the Bible we've heard of before. For them to have blessed her in that way, again, like you're saying, a Moabite, like it was big. Yeah.
And then the other one, there's first I thought it was a comparison, but it's really almost more of a contrast. And I don't know if it's so much about the mothers or the women as much as it is about the men. And I'll kind of explain this as I go. So the next thing is that he would, that Boaz would be blessed, and that it says in verse 12, and may the Lord give you descendants by this young woman, who will be like those of our ancestor Perez, the son of Tamar and Judah. So if you don't know that story, you got to go back to Genesis. And so you have a few comparisons between Ruth and Tamar. So the comparison is this. We know Ruth's husband had died before she had kids. Yeah. She was, you get the indication that she was probably barren because they had been together for a while and had no kids. So Tamar had been promised to Who? E-R.
Not her.
That's his name. Tamar had been promised to who was the eldest son of Judah. And he died before they could have kids. And then what happened is, so following this Levitical law here that we were talking about, then Judah said, okay, well, since he died without giving a child, then he goes to his next son, and he says, okay, you need to go marry her according to this same law that Boaz and Naomi had invoked here. And so he gets married, but he doesn't want to have a son. He kind of falls in the place of this other kinsman redeemer where he's like, okay, I'll do it. I have to do it because it's the brother-in-law, so it's the more severe case. He says, I'll do it, but he doesn't really want to produce an heir because it wouldn't be, there's nothing for him to gain from it. And so he takes precautions. He takes steps. We're just going to leave it at that. You can go back and read it to get the details, all right? But he takes steps to make sure that he doesn't produce an heir with Tamar. And God is so upset that he has really dodged this law that was in place, this responsibility, that God kills him.
Yeah.
And so he ends up dying. So then Judah tells Tamar, all right, listen, I got another son, but he's too young to get married right now. So you go home and live with your family. And when he's old enough, I'll send him to get you, and you guys can get married and produce a son for your first husband. Well, years go by. Judah never fulfills it. In fact, the Bible says that he knew from the beginning he wouldn't do it because he was afraid his third son would die.
Yeah.
Because he'd already lost two that had been married to this woman. And so he never intended to do it. Long story short, years go by. Tamar finds out that Judah has come to town. His wife has died. And so I guess he's lonely. And so she goes and she disguises herself so that he won't recognize her. Disguises herself as a prostitute. He ends up bringing her in. They end up sleeping together. And she gets pregnant and gives birth to twins of Judah, born of Judah, that one of whom is Perez, who becomes the ancestor to Boaz. And so that's kind of this lineage that goes on here. And at first, again, I thought it was this comparison that we're comparing Tamar to Ruth. But really, I think it was more of a contrast between Judah and Boaz, where Judah refused to take the responsibility of making sure his family line was continued. Boaz went above and beyond to make sure the family line was continued.
You see a difference there.
And so you see this difference in responsibilities. Tamar had to resort to deception to make the family line continue. And by contrast, Boaz went above and beyond to redeem not only Ruth, but the family line. And I just thought it was an interesting blessing that they would say, we recognize that Ruth is from the outside, but we want her to have kids. Yeah. And we hope that they will be like Boaz. And so this descendant of Perez, but they like when you read it, again, it was in the reading. I had to read it a couple times, but it's like what they're saying is we hope that your children are like their dad.
Well, because so even if you look at the Rachel and Leah story, and then definitely with the Judah and Tamar story, it's like drama. Like gets, And so when I read that and saw that blessing, it's this thing of it. I think it's just the clarity of like understanding God. You use what man screws up sometimes. Yeah. You still have the ability to work in it. And I just think that, when you look at the genealogy of, it's not all quite as perfect as Ruth and Boaz, right?
No.
A lot of it is kind of messed up. And so it's just this amazing thing that God continues to do what he wants to do, even through some crazy characters, right? But like I just read that, and just even in chaos, I guess, is like this blessing that God wants to give. And he used different, it wasn't always just this pretty picture of people that he used. And even in this situation, obviously, their characters were godly. Yeah. But the situation, I guess, and the tragedy that happened, you can kind of pull some parallels of, it wasn't just this pleasant story of how they all got together,
So just to close it out here, in verse 13 it says, So Boaz took Ruth into his home, and she became his wife. When he slept with her, the Lord enabled her to become pregnant, and she gave birth to a son. Then the women of the town said to Naomi, Praise the Lord, who has now provided a redeemer for your family. May this child be famous in Israel. May he restore your youth and care for you in your old age. For he is the son of your daughter-in-law, who loves you and has been better to you than 7 sons. Naomi took the baby and cuddled him to her breast, and she cared for him as if he were her own. The neighbor women said, Now at last Naomi has a son again, and they named him Obed. He became the father of Jesse and the grandfather of David. This is the genealogical record of their ancestor Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron was the father of Ram. Ram was the father of Amminadab. Amminadab was the father of Nahshon. Nahshon was the father of Salmon. Salmon was the father of Boaz by Rahab, the prostitute Rahab. Boaz was the father of Obed, and Obed was the father of Jesse. Jesse was the father of David. So I thought this was interesting because I don't know why. We've made it 4 chapters. We've made it to the second last verse of this entire book before I realized, again, before it struck me that Boaz's mom was Rahab. The prostitute Rahab. I knew that, guys. I knew that.
So I didn't know that until chapter 3, maybe, because you're kind of studying as you go.
You didn't say anything. All right.
And it is this. I did have this thing of, was Boaz more open to Ruth? Because it was like, my mom's story is this. God did this with my mom. My
mom was not originally one of the children of Israel.
Right. So you just see how, because of his background, because of what he saw God do in his parents. Yeah. And that's true for us, right? When we see something God does in our grandparents or our parents, it makes you more, oh, God, what do you, that makes you more open. It makes you see things in people that maybe you wouldn't have seen before.
Yeah. And even, you can take it. And again, there was such hostility among people that were not considered to be, even you fast forward a few hundred years and you have the Samaritans who were considered to be these half-breeds, part Gentile, part Jew. And yet that was Boaz. Yeah. Boaz was part Gentile, part Jew, but his mom converted to become a believer of God. Right. And yet by blood, he was half Jew, half Gentile. And so you just see that and you think there could have been hostilities there. So he recognizes who Ruth is, who's left the Gentile and the pagan beliefs and come into
maybe
that's
why God. He had such respect for her to say, I know you've made a choice to leave it. And
he sees his mother's story in her. Yeah. In a lot of ways he would see his mother's story in her. And I would say you look at all that and just, no matter how messy your past is, like God continues to redeem and to redeem and to redeem. And so the story of redemption is seen going all the way back to Rahab is God redeems her through her belief in God. And so then she marries an Israelite man who then they have a son who then God uses to redeem another Moabite woman, a Moabite woman, and bring her in, and she becomes, and this goes on to King David, who then goes on to obviously be part of the line of Jesus, and you just see this incredible redemption story leading all the way up to the greatest redemption story that comes through Jesus. And so even in Jesus' own story, redemption is a product of what's already gone on.
All of these things. So you read the genealogy there, and sometimes we have this tendency to just skip over all this, and I just think it's so important. Like, these are names of people that God chose to use. This is not just it's not just a name that we don't need to know anything about. It's like, no, he put this here for a reason. So it represents more than just, here's the boring genealogy of Jesus. No, like, this shows that there's a bigger story, and it also shows that, like, our stories matter within this big story. Yeah. Like, here we've just read Ruth and Boaz's story, and it could come across, that was a sweet little story about this. But then when you put it in the context of the genealogy, you're like, it's just like this big picture. So the whole genealogy from, like, if you want to go like Abraham to Jesus, is in Matthew chapter 1, and it actually just lays it out there. But I read that, and just like, it made me realize, like, how important our life is on that personal level to make the right choices. Boaz needed to make the right choice. Ruth needed to make the right choice. Naomi needed to follow God and make the right choice. So on that individual level, like, it's really important. But then when you look at the genealogy, you're just seeing your little life put together in this big plan that God had. And ultimately, again, we've talked about it, that the book of Ruth is about this parallel of Jesus and him redeeming us, and him buying us back from that hopeless place that we were lost and dead in our sin. Well, Jesus redeemed us. And so you're seeing a picture of that in this story. And I just wrote down, like, this is salvation. This is our salvation story. and how you just get a glimpse and a picture of it.
And I think that's the whole, like, as you summarize the book of Ruth, you just see how it really shows how God uses the story of ordinary people to accomplish this incredible plan that he has laid out. And so, and again, you look at it and you realize, okay, God doesn't cause pain in our lives, but he can use everything. Yeah. And so you take the story of Ruth, who marries a man who is barren for years, who then becomes a widow, who then makes these hard choices to follow her mother-in-law, knowing that she could live in poverty, and who then happens upon the field of her mother-in-law's kinsman redeemer, and gives her favor with him, and all of these things. And because of her integrity and her character, he's drawn to her, and all of these pieces that start to fall together that all come out of this. If you remember chapter 1, Naomi is in this pit of despair. Yeah. She's depressed and she's bitter. Yeah. And she's angry. And then here at the end of the story, it's like her joy is restored to her, as she may have lost 2 sons, but she has gained this daughter-in-law who's done more for her than 7 sons. She holds her grandchild in her hand. The legacy and the lineage continues on, and beyond that, they become part of the genealogy of Jesus. But even the fact, just how God even moves, again, he just moves through ordinary people who are willing to make choices, and he doesn't care what their backstory is. Yeah,
thank goodness.
You know, once they surrender, it was like, you know, we would look at it and probably read through the genealogy of Jesus and just assume everybody on that list is Jewish by heritage and descent, right? Yeah. And yet here you have these people
perfectly sinless and holy.
Perfectly sinless, holy, and all these things, and yet you see deception, you see pagans who turn to God, you see all these different people and mixtures and diversity in the line of Jesus, yet all used to bring, as they surrender to God, all used to bring about the Redeemer of the world.
The real redemption.
Yeah.
The real redemption story.
Yeah. So it's just, again, it goes back to that beginning where we talked about making those hard choices, even when they seem hard, of just being faithful and being having characters of integrity and faithfulness and obedience and loving and just going above and beyond.
I like that
what
you
is required.
Brought up Naomi, because as much as the story is about Ruth and Boaz, like, it kind of starts with Naomi and it ends with Naomi. And it's that thing where it says, you know, the women of the town say, praise the Lord who has now provided a redeemer for your family. And so again, you mentioned, like, in the beginning, like, she said basically, what has God done to me? You know, and she uses that word, I'm going to change my name. And then now the women of the town are praising God because they're looking at her life and seeing what God has done. And I just like, it's this reality of God wants to use our lives, our story, to bring praise to God at the end of the story. You know, there's a lot of things that happen in between with our story, and things that are tragic and things that we go through. But ultimately, God wants to use our stories so that, like, praise and blessing comes from people at the end of it. And that's what you see. Yeah. Is God takes care of Naomi in the end too.
He does. He does.
Yeah.
So there it is, guys. That is the book of Ruth. You can check that one off the list of books that we have now gone through and studied. And so thanks again for being with us. As always, we throw it out to you if there's a book of the Bible that you're interested in, or even a passage of scripture or topic that you'd like to hear, whether it's a biblical question that you have, or maybe something that's happening in the world and you just want to know the biblical perspective on it. We are always open to those suggestions and questions and comments, and so you can do that by commenting where you're watching. Send us an email at lunchwithpb&j@gmail.com. Send us a direct message on our socials, and if you know us, text us. All right. Outside of that, do everything I said at the beginning. Follow, subscribe, share, all those wonderful things. Let more people know about it, and we'll see you next week on Lunch with PB&J.
That's a wrap.